Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a 17th century archive, really trying to strip away the layers of varnish applied to what has to be one of history's great survival stories.
Absolutely. Our subject is Anne of Austria.
Right, and she's so often just reduced to this footnote, isn't she? The mother of the Sun King, Louis XIV.
And that's such a massive historical injustice because Anne of Austria, well, born Anna Maria Mauritia,
Hmm.
Infanta of Spain, she wasn't a footnote at all. She was really the intensely pressured foundation that Louis XIV's absolute monarchy was built on.
Yeah.
Her life was, well, nearly 50 years of just pure endurance, navigating this incredibly hostile French court as a Spanish princess, dealing with isolation, constant surveillance, accusations of treason. It's quite a story.
We really dove deep into the source materials for this one, and what we found wasn't quite that serene, pious queen you sometimes see in, let's say, later biographies.
No, not at all. The narrative that emerges is really defined by psychological terror and, frankly, betrayal.
We're looking at a 14-year-old girl literally traded across a river like some kind of commodity, and she had to outwit not just a powerful cardinal, but also a husband who actively seemed to despise her.
Just to survive, just to secure her own existence, and by extension, the future of the Bourbon dynasty.
It's crucial, isn't it, to set the stage properly for you, the listener.
Absolutely critical. This marriage, we're talking early 17th century, it was the political equivalent of, I don't know, two scorpions shaking hands. It wasn't about love or connection.
No.
It was the core of a double marriage deal designed purely to cement a very fragile peace between the two biggest Catholic powerhouses in Europe, the Habsburgs in Spain and the Bourbons in France. These families were often at war.
So Anne's wedding was just a treaty, a physical treaty.
Essentially, yes, a temporary physical embodiment of an alliance. Nothing more personal than that, at least initially.
So our mission today for this deep dive is really to understand the sheer necessity of her survival, because everything that comes later hinges on it.
Yeah.
How did this young Spanish girl manage to endure decades, literal decades, of intense humiliation, isolation, even terror, only to then shatter her late husband's final wishes?
Right, and not just survive, but become the sole regent of France.
And successfully guide the most powerful king in French history onto the throne. It's an incredible arc.
It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting right at the beginning. The moment her childhood basically became irrelevant to the state.
Yeah, that transition from Spanish infanta to French queen, it wasn't gentle. It was abrupt, deeply political. Anna Marie Mauritia was told, flat out, not asked, about her fate.
When was this?
August 1612, she was barely 11 years old. And the negotiations for this double wedding, her marrying Louis and Louis' sister Elizabeth marrying Anne's brother Philip, they'd been grinding on for 3 years already.
And the preparations sound cheatingly pragmatic. They weren't negotiating a future friendship, were they?
Not at all. They were negotiating assets, contingencies. The sources are clear. Her dowry was huge, 500,000 crowns. But Spanish diplomats had already calculated the exact amount they'd demand back if her young French husband died before they produced a living heir.
Wow. So they were planning for her widowhood before she even met the guy?
Precisely. Yeah. Talk about pressure. And she already carried immense responsibility. Her mother, Margaret of Austria, had tragically died less than a year before this announcement.
Oh.
So Anna Maria, still a child herself, was already acting as a kind of little mother, caring for her younger siblings.
There's that one anecdote you mentioned from the sources. It just perfectly captures that moment. Her innocence was, well, annihilated.
Oh, the peacocks. Yes.
Wow.
She learned she was to marry the King of France while she was in the gardens of the Royal Alcazar in Madrid, just feeding breadcrumbs to her late mother's peacocks. An ordinary moment shattered by extraordinary news.
And she was told she's going to marry the king of a country she only knew as the enemy.
Yeah.
Exactly. A generational enemy. And the French language itself, the language she was now supposed to master and live in, it sounded to her, apparently, like water gurgling over rocks.
Alien.
Completely alien, cold, foreign. This wasn't a journey towards a welcoming new home. This was essentially high-stakes exile disguised as a marriage.
The actual wedding ceremony, then, in Burgos, October 18, 1615, it really drives home that cold, transactional nature, doesn't it?
It really does. A wedding by proxy. She pledged herself not to a man, not even to a picture, but to an empty chair.
Just an empty chair draped with French lilies.
That's right. While her brother Philip stood in for the absent Louis XIII.
And she wore her mother's dress.
Her deceased mother's wedding dress, altered for her, heavy with Spanish gold and pearls. You have to try and visualize that moment. A young girl pledging her body, her future, her loyalty to An absence, a symbol of power, not a person.
Then came the journey, 40 days to France.
An arduous 40-day journey. And the climax, the real symbolic moment, was the ceremonial exchange on the island of Pheasants. Right, in the Bidassoa River, famous diplomatic spot.
And the location itself is so symbolic. This platform built over the water, belonging just for that moment to neither Spain nor France, a kind of no man's land.
And that's where she crossed paths with Louis XIII's sister, Elizabeth.
Exactly. Elizabeth of France, heading the other way to marry Anne's brother, Philip. Two teenage princesses literally exchanged like valuable diplomatic pieces, leaving their homes behind forever.
Her brother Philip's last words to her, whispered in Spanish, what were they again?
Be brave, little Infanta. Remember, you are Habsburg blood. Not just comfort, really. It was a command, an anchor.
An anchor that would cause her decades of trouble.
Precisely. That single instruction, that identity, would become the focus of intense scrutiny and political danger for the next 20 years.
She was walking towards this new life, but every step was taking her further from everything she knew, the Spanish sun, her family.
The language she prayed in. And she must have known, the second she stepped onto French soil, that her very identity, being Spanish, being Habsburg, was a weapon her enemies could and would use against her.
So she arrives in Bordeaux. The culture shock must have been immediate.
Profound. Especially the French court's appearance and behavior. You know, the Spanish court valued solemnity, dignity, modesty, and dress.
And the French?
French fashion, she discovered, was all about display, as much flesh as possible, as one source puts it. Corsets cut so low. Well, it was a shock.
And the court itself, a noisy mix.
The cacophony of languages, international nobility buzzing around. But Spanish was conspicuously, and you have to assume deliberately, excluded. It sent a clear message.
Her first real humiliation, though, was the inspection by her mother-in-law.
Marie de Medici, yes. Effectively the regent of France at that point. And she examined Anne, circled her slowly. The description is like a horse at auction. Brutal. And the quote itself, it is brutal. Marie announced, apparently quite loudly, she's smaller than expected and darker.
Oh.
Well, Spanish blood, what can one expect? And then the assessment, at least she has good teeth. She'll breed well enough, God willing.
Her entire worth reduced to breeding potential.
In that moment, yes. She was a vessel for heirs, nothing more.
And then the groom himself, Louis XIII.
The reluctant groom, exactly 14, born just 5 days after Anne. Sources describe him as incredibly nervous, stuttering, physically unable to even meet her eye.
Just a terrified kid, really.
Looking, according to one contemporary observer, like he'd rather be anywhere else, maybe facing execution even.
But wedding feast sounds like agony, 7 hours.
7 hours. And sitting beside the stranger, her husband, who just systematically ignored her the entire time.
What did he talk about instead?
Hunting. Dogs, hawks, anything but the young woman beside him. He was talking to his master of the hunt.
Yeah, that external view from the Duke of Buckingham, the English diplomat.
Yes. He wrote later he'd never seen a bridegroom look more miserable. Described Louis looking more miserable as if he were being led to execution. It was clearly a marriage of two scared children.
But only one of them held the power to make the other's life miserable.
Precisely. And then came the consummation ritual.
Right. The witnesses, listener, just try to imagine this. French protocol demanded witnesses. Anne, 14 years old, is stripped naked in front of 24 courtiers.
Physicians, priests, senior nobles. All there to verify she was, quote, unblemished and capable of bearing the future king.
The physicians examined her, clinically.
With total detachment, recording notes like, hips adequate for childbearing in official ledgers. She learned instantly, physically, that as queen, she has zero right to privacy. Her body was state property.
And the official records the next day declared it consummated, displayed the sheets.
Yes, blooded sheets were displayed, as protocol demanded. Proof. But here's the critical, miserable detail whispered by servants later.
The chicken.
The blood supposedly came from a chicken. And Louis, either terrified or repulsed or both, spent the entire night huddled on the far side of this enormous bed, refusing point blank to touch his bride.
Whether that specific rumor is true or not.
The underlying truth is undeniable. Louis would not share her bed again for 4 years.
4 years.
4 years. It's 4,460 nights. A queen sleeping alone in these grand French castles, while the entire court watched, whispered, and wondered what was wrong with her.
And Louis's own eccentricities must have made it even harder to understand.
Definitely. He had this morbid obsession with death, kept detailed records of everyone who died in Paris each day.
Strange.
And a stutter, a tendency to faint at the sight of women's bare shoulders. He'd apparently literally run away if he bumped into Anne unexpectedly in a hallway.
So for 4 years, she was just this political obligation he couldn't face.
A sexual burden and a political duty he simply couldn't handle, or wouldn't.
Then, in 1617, Louis makes his move against his mother.
Right, the coup. He asserts his own power, orchestrates the assassination of his mother, Marie de Medici's favorite, Concini. Louis is finally free from his mother's control.
But for Anne, things got worse.
Immediately worse. Deeper, more deliberate isolation. Louis's very first act, within an hour of seizing power, was a brutal purge of Anne's Spanish household.
He just sent them all away.
Sent French guards to her door with lists. Gave her most cherished attendants, including her childhood dwarf companion, little Maria, 1 hour. 1 hour to pack and leave France forever.
Did Anne try to stop him?
She begged him, on her knees, pleaded with him to let her keep just one familiar face, one person who spoke Spanish.
And he refused.
Coldly refused. Declared Spain was France's enemy and you must learn to be French. He didn't just isolate her politically. He ripped away every single emotional anchor she had left. It was psychological warfare, plain and simple.
Which brings us into this next phase, this really dark decade for her. 15 years marked by loss, contempt.
And eventually, Cardinal Richelieu. But first, the losses. In 1619, there's a brief thaw, politically and personally. Louis, under immense pressure to get an heir, starts visiting her chambers.
How are those encounters described?
Awkward, mechanical, brief. But crucially, she conceived quickly. The court was overjoyed. Finally, the dynasty seemed secure.
But it wasn't.
No. In December 1619, she delivered a stillborn son. And the court, especially Louis's faction, immediately blamed Anne. Negligence, they whispered.
And Louis's reaction?
He stood at the foot of her bed while she was recovering. His face, reportedly, a mask of cold disgust. His only words to her, in her grief and pain, the chilling command, try harder next time.
Try harder next time. That just sums it up, doesn't it?
It encapsulates the entire relationship. She wasn't a wife, not a partner. She was a failed tool.
And she got pregnant again quickly.
3 months later, yes. This time, the court physicians basically put her under house arrest, terrified of losing this second chance.
But she miscarried again.
In 1622. Desperate for just some fresh air, she convinced her ladies to take her into the garden. She tripped on her heavy skirts, a minor fall, but she started bleeding. The second child was lost.
And Louis's reaction this time?
Terrifying, violent. He stormed into her rooms, screaming. Accused her of murdering his heir, called her a Spanish witch. Said she was a Habsburg curse on the Bourbons.
Did he hurt her?
When she tried to apologize, he couldn't bring himself to strike the queen directly, but he lashed out, striking the wall beside her head so hard his knuckles bled.
So, after 4 years of rejection, he turns physically intimidating and abusive when she finally conceives and then loses the child accidentally. How did the court react to that kind of open rage?
They largely accepted it. He was the king. She was Spanish. In their eyes, she was inherently suspect, inherently guilty.
And this happened again, more stillbirths.
Over the next decade, 4 more stillbirths, 6 small coffins in total. Louis looked at her with open contempt. She lived in constant fear of being repudiated, exiled, maybe worse, for failing to produce that heir.
And the medical treatments.
Oh, they tried everything. Almost medieval stuff. Ground pearls, bull's blood, painful bloodletting. They even tried positioning her bed according to astrological charts to catch favorable planetary influences. Nothing worked. And nothing erased the contempt in Louis's eyes.
And then in 1624, Cardinal Richelieu enters the picture.
And the situation goes from utterly miserable to what one source calls an exquisite nightmare.
Richelieu, Louis's chief minister.
A political genius, yes. Calculating where Louis was merely cold and insecure, Richelieu immediately saw Anne not just as a breeding failure, but as a genuine political threat.
A Spanish spy.
He convinced Louis she was exactly that. Maintaining dangerous secret correspondence with her family in Spain, this escalated her situation from personal misery to constant high-stakes treason risk.
And this wasn't just paranoia. Richelieu actually implemented a surveillance state around her.
A full-blown surveillance state within her own household. It meant constant, relentless paranoia for Anne.
What did that look like day to day?
Spies everywhere. Ladies in waiting, reporting her moods, her gestures, every casual word. Servants going through her private letters, her drawers. But maybe the most disturbing part?
The confessor.
Richelieu placed a confessor who violated the absolute sanctity of confession. Reported her prayers, her deepest fears, everything, directly back to the cardinal.
That's profound isolation. You can't trust your attendants, your belongings, not even your God. How does she possibly survive that? What was her strategy?
She developed this iron self-control. Trust no one. Speak only the most harmless things, the weather, fashion. Bury her true thoughts so deep, as one source suggests, that even she struggled to find them sometimes. He had to become emotionally blank on the surface, a perfect mask of regal dignity.
And she learned some of this from a spy.
Ironically, yes, Malene de Fargas. Richelieu placed her in Anne's household in 1626, specifically to monitor her.
But she turned.
Seems so. Maybe impressed by Anne's quiet endurance? Maybe seeing Richelieu's cruelty for what it was? Malene became Anne's only real confidant. She taught Anne the crucial art of patience, how to appear compliant while waiting, how to maintain that poise, and basically how to outlast your enemies.
Patience she definitely needed, especially in 1630, the Day of Dupes.
Ah, yes. The moment Anne and her old adversary, her mother-in-law Marie de Medici, actually teamed up, they tried to use Louis's illness as leverage to finally get rid of Richelieu.
Their goal was to oust him, change foreign policy, end the wars with Spain.
Exactly. And they almost succeeded. They cornered Louis, got him to verbally agree to dismiss the cardinal. For a few hours, it looked like they'd won.
But Richelieu, he was too clever.
Far too clever. He rushed back to the palace, confronted Louis directly, appealed to Louis's deep-seated insecurity, but also his recognition of competence.
How did he phrase it?
Essentially argued, "You might hate me, sire, but nobody else can run this country, centralize power, and win these wars for you like I can." Louis chose competence over comfort, or maybe over being managed by the women in his life.
And the result?
Marie de Medici was permanently exiled.
Yeah.
Anne's remaining supporters were purged. Anne was left more isolated than ever, completely exposed to Richelieu's power and malice.
Then things got truly dangerous in 1635.
France formally declared war on Spain, her home country. Now, any communication with her brother, Philip IV, wasn't just frowned upon, it was legally treason, punishable by death.
And Richelieu was just waiting for her to slip up.
Exactly. He intercepted letters where Anne wrote mainly about her crushing loneliness, her desperate wish just to see a familiar face. Richelieu twisted this, presented it as proof of high conspiracy, claiming she was leaking military secrets.
The absolute low point came in 1637, didn't it?
The discovery at Val de Grace. Richelieu's spies found out she was using her visits to this convent as a secure way to smuggle letters to her brother. The evidence was undeniable this time.
And she was hauled before the King's Council.
Yes. Stripped of her royal dignity, interrogated like a common criminal. Richelieu painted her as the ultimate enemy within. A Habsburg agent who'd spent 22 years undermining France.
They accused her of plotting to marry Louis's brother.
Gaston d'Orléans, yes. The accusation was she planned to marry him after Louis died, to seize power that way.
Her defense was pretty cutting, though.
Devastating in its bitterness. She actually laughed this broken, bitter sound and looked straight at Louis. "If I wanted to escape my misery by remarriage," she asked, "wouldn't I flee instantly to Madrid the moment I was widowed? Basically, why would a supposed Spanish spy choose another French prince? It made no sense."
And Louis just sat there through all this, her husband of 22 years.
Yeah. Presided over her humiliation. In the end, she wasn't executed or exiled. The diplomatic fallout with Spain would have been too massive.
So her sentence was?
More insidious. Continued intensified public surveillance, deeper isolation, and continued forced marriage to the man who despised her. That was her life sentence. Just keep enduring.
Then comes what the sources call the miracle. Or maybe, given everything, the irony of fate.
It's definitely ironic. The turning point was December 5, 1637, just months after that public humiliation before the council.
What happened that night?
An unusual massive winter storm hit Paris. Roads impassable. Louis XIII had planned to travel, but was forced by the weather and protocol to sleep at the Louvre Palace instead.
And the only suitable royal bedchamber available
Was by architectural necessity and court hierarchy in the Queen's apartments.
So the man who had made her life a careful hell, as one source puts it, for over 20 years.
Was physically trapped by bad weather and bureaucracy, forced to share her bed for the first time in years, and was 36 by then.
Do the sources say anything about that night? Emotionally?
Complete silence. Was it cold duty? A flicker of something else after all that time? We simply don't know. But the political result was undeniable.
9 months later.
September 5, 1638. Anne gave birth to a living, healthy son.
And France went wild.
Absolutely mad with joy. He was immediately christened Louis Dieudonné, Louis the God-given. It truly felt like divine intervention after 23 years of a barren royal marriage.
The court that had scorned her now celebrated her.
Proclaimed her blessed. Even Richelieu had to kneel before her, though the sources pointedly note his eyes remained cold as winter stone. He likely saw the baby mainly as a new political problem for his own power.
And Louis XIII, the father.
Barely looked at Anne. It seems he just couldn't bridge those 23 years of bitterness and contempt. He had the heir he desperately needed, but he couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge the woman who gave him that heir.
And then lightning struck twice.
Astonishingly, yes. Just 15 months later, September 21st, 1640, Anne gave birth to a second healthy son, Philippe, the future Duke of Orleans.
She was 39.
39. Practically ancient for royal childbearing back then.
Yeah.
Yet here she was, having secured the dynasty with two healthy princes in rapid succession after decades of failure.
She must have thrown herself into motherhood.
With this desperate, all-consuming intensity, like someone finding water after decades in the desert. She nursed them herself, which shocked the court. It was very unfashionable.
And taught them Spanish lullabies.
Yes, in private, when no one was listening. For the first time since she left Madrid almost 25 years earlier, she had people who truly belonged to her, a family she'd built through sheer endurance.
Meanwhile, the political landscape was shifting.
Richelieu died in 1642, a huge moment. But Louis XIII was also fading fast, dying of tuberculosis.
So Anne might have felt some relief about Richelieu, but Louis was too ill to even care.
Pretty much. And Louis spent his final failing months focused on one last act of, well, cruelty seems the right word, designed to strip Anne of power even after he was gone.
His will.
His will. A final calculated message of his profound distrust. It set up this rigid regency council to rule France. Anne would be queen mother in name only, unable to make any real decisions without the council's unanimous agreement.
After 28 years of marriage, that was his parting gift, an attempt to politically neuter her.
That was it. His final act of malice.
When did Louis XIII die?
May 14, 1643. His last words were apparently for his little 4-year-old son. Be a better king than I was. And then he was gone.
So Anne was free from her husband finally, but still trapped by his will.
Legally free, yes, but politically bound by the decree of a dead man who had spent nearly 3 decades making her life miserable.
But the Spanish girl, Anna Maria Mauricia, she was long gone by this point, wasn't she?
Long buried deep inside. Now, it was Anne of Austria, the woman who had survived decades of surveillance, learned the treacherous rules of French politics the hard way. She was ready.
And she moved quickly.
Within days of Louis's death,
Yeah.
she appeared before the Parliament of Paris, the High Court.
How did she present herself?
In widow's black, appropriately somber, but everyone noted the composure, the steel in her spine, and crucially, she addressed them in flawless French. No trace of the Spanish accent that had been such a liability for so long.
Her argument to them was clever, wasn't it? Appealed to their self-interest.
Brilliant. She argued France needed strong, unified leadership, especially in wartime, not a weak committee of squabbling nobles, which the council would inevitably become.
And she played the foreigner card.
Beautifully. Claimed that as a foreigner, she'd have to rely entirely on French wisdom, on their advice. Flattered them into thinking they'd hold the real power if they supported her.
And it worked.
Masterfully. The same men who'd watched Richelieu humiliate her, who'd heard the treason accusations, they voted unanimously to set aside the dead king's will. They made Anne of Austria the sole regent of France.
The victim became the victor.
Just like that, the most powerful woman in the kingdom.
Her first big political move was choosing her chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin.
Yes, Richelieu's protege, a choice that surprised many at the time.
Why him? Why not break completely from the Richelieu era?
Political genius. Mazarin was Italian, a diplomat, not a French noble with his own power base. Richelieu was French steel, they said, but Mazarin was Italian silk. Charming, pragmatic, incredibly clever.
And loyal.
Crucially, loyal to her. He owed his career to Richelieu, and now to Anne, not to the established French court factions. She ensured his loyalty was primarily to the crown, meaning to her and her young son.
And their partnership immediately sparked rumors.
Intense speculation that they were lovers, maybe even secretly married. Their political alliance was so close, so effective for so long.
Does it matter politically if they were lovers?
Almost irrelevant to the political outcome. But the rumors themselves might have been useful. After a lifetime of being mocked for loneliness and barrenness, Anne now presented this incredibly united, powerful front with her chosen minister. That image of stability was vital. It suggested the Spanish princess had finally found her equal, emotionally and politically.
Her real test, though, her real display of skill and courage came during the Fronde.
The Fronde Civil Wars, yes, between 1648 and 1653. This wasn't just a minor disturbance. It was a major internal conflict.
What were the nobles, the frondeurs, upset about?
High wartime taxes, the growing power of the central government under Mazarin, basically trying to claw back privileges and curb the authority of the regency. They saw weakness, a foreign queen, an Italian cardinal, and they pushed.
And Anne showed unexpected toughness.
Absolutely. When Parisian mobs threatened the palace, she made the strategic call to retreat rather than risk confrontation in the city.
That's when she smuggled the kids out.
Smuggled her young sons, Louis XIV included, out of Paris in the dead of night. The legend says Louis was hidden in the laundry basket to get past the checkpoints. This was a regent actively protecting her king, risking everything.
And that famous story when the rebels stormed the palace.
Right, they stormed Louis XIV's bedchamber, demanding to see the king to make sure he hadn't fled Paris again. He was about 10 years old.
What did Anne do?
She didn't panic, didn't hide, stood calmly right beside the enormous royal bed, pulled back the curtains herself, showing them the sleeping boy.
And said,
With perfect, almost terrifying calm.
"Gentlemen, the king is here as you see. I trust you'll allow his majesty to continue his rest." Wow. That's pure command presence, learned through decades of enduring scrutiny.
Exactly. Her sheer, unflappable dignity reportedly shamed the armed rebels, and they just backed down and left. She and Mazarin played the situation brilliantly afterwards, too, pretending to exile Mazarin while secretly coordinating with him to divide and conquer their enemies.
And she won.
She won the Fronde. By 1653, royal authority was fully restored. She proved to France she was stronger than any committee, stronger than any noble revolt, and utterly dedicated to her son's future power.
Then in 1659, she basically capped her political career.
The Treaty of the Pyrenees, finally ending the long, bloody war between France and Spain, the war that had defined and poisoned her entire adult life.
The irony is just thick.
So rich. Anne, the victim of one political marriage across the border, now successfully negotiates the terms for another. Her son, Louis XIV, will marry her niece, Maria Theresa of Spain.
Did she try to warn her niece?
The sources say she tried. But how do you possibly summarize 28 years of managed suffering and political maneuvering in a brief chat with a young princess? What could she even say?
The real emotional climax must have been in 1660, at her son's wedding, meeting her brother again.
Philip IV. For the first time in 45 years. He embraced her, whispered to her in Spanish, assuming perhaps that she'd forgotten the language of her childhood after all this time.
But she hadn't.
Not a word, responded slowly, like a river returning to its course. And when Philip gently lamented the recent war between their countries, she made this incredibly defining public statement, loud enough for both the Spanish and French courts to hear clearly.
What did she say?
I was a good Frenchwoman. I owed it to the king, my son, and to France.
Wow. Declaring her allegiance.
Absolutely. The Spanish delegation was reportedly stunned. Their lost Infanta was truly gone. But the sources also note that later that night, alone in her rooms, she wept. For the first time in years, apparently. Grieving the young Spanish girl she had to kill to survive as a French queen.
Mazarin died in 1661.
Yes. And Louis XIV, now 22, was ready to rule in his own right. He gently, but very firmly, took the reins of government, moved his mother aside from active politics.
Did she fight it?
No, she didn't resist. Her core purpose was achieved. She had secured the dynasty, navigated the Fronde, ended the war, and raised the man who had become the Sun King. Her work was done.
So she shifted her focus.
To cultural influence. She patronized Spanish artists in France, commissioned translations of Spanish literature, influenced court fashion with Spanish touches, subtle ways perhaps of honoring the self she'd had to bury for so long. But history had one more cruel twist for her.
Watching her own son repeat his father's mistakes.
Exactly. She watched Louis XIV begin to treat his Spanish wife, her own niece, Maria Theresa, with the same kind of cold indifference and public infidelity that Louis III had shown her. And she was powerless to stop it, powerless to protect her niece from the cycle repeating.
She spent her final years mainly at the convent.
At Val-de-Grace, yes. The very convent she'd risked her life using to smuggle letters decades before. She poured money into rebuilding it, transforming it into this lavish monument to the Virgin Mary.
Why the Virgin Mary specifically?
She credited Mary with interceding to grant her sons after those decades of barrenness. It's a profound choice for a legacy, isn't it? Not a monument to her political power, but a church. Perhaps, as some sources suggest, God or the Virgin, felt like the only constant, reliable presence in her tumultuous life, the only one who heard her prayers when they were still in Spanish.
The cancer appeared in 1664.
Breast cancer. She faced death with the same quiet dignity she'd faced everything else. Masking, you have to assume, decades of accumulated pain and loss.
Louis XIV asked her on her deathbed if she had regrets.
Yes, and she gave the expected courtly answer. My only regret is that I must leave you, meaning him, her son. But the sources hint the truth was much deeper, much sadder.
What kind of regrets?
Regret for the lost life, perhaps. The 4 babies who never drew breath. The mother who died too young. The brother she didn't see for 45 years. Regret, maybe most profoundly, for the necessity of burying her true Spanish self simply to survive and fulfill her role as Queen of France.
She died in 1666. How old was she?
64, having outlived her husband Louis XIII by exactly 23 years.
23 years, the exact same number of years she spent in that childless, humiliating marriage before Louis Dieudonné was born.
The symmetry is chilling, isn't it? 23 years of enforced misery and endurance, followed by 23 years of hard-won power and regency. They buried her at Saint Denis beside Louis XIII, united in death in a way they certainly never were in life.
And her epitaph, it's so simple, it's almost insulting.
Notoriously simple. Wife of Louis XIII, mother of Louis XIV.
And that right there is the missing story.
Exactly. That's the injustice we wanted to address in this deep dive. The epitaph completely omits the decades of surveillance, the treason accusations, the constant fear, the 6 dead babies, the 4 years sleeping alone, the nights spent weeping in foreign sheets after being traded like property.
It omits the 14-year-old girl married to a boy who wouldn't touch her. It omits the 23 years of sheer grinding endurance that were the absolute prerequisite for her eventual 23 years of power.
Anne of Austria's life really is this profound paradox. She moved from a state of almost unimaginable psychological cruelty and isolation
to absolute political command. She literally held France in her hands during the Regency.
She transformed personal tragedy into political necessity. She saved the Bourbon dynasty and paved the way for the grandeur of her son's reign.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, what does her life tell us?
It's a stark warning, I think, that some triumphs look awfully similar to tragedies up close. That some crowns are really just thorns painted gold. She achieved immense political success, raised France's greatest king, arguably, but the cost.
The cost was the Spanish girl she had to kill inside herself.
Precisely. The complete obliteration of her original identity.
We often celebrate the glory of the Sun King, the stability and power she secured for him, but we really ask you, the listener, to consider the sheer weight of what she endured to make that possible.
Think about the silence surrounding those wedding bills in Bordeaux back in 1615. The terrified girl marrying an empty chair.
Was the price of becoming that victor, that powerful regent, worth ceasing to live as herself?
Which leaves us with that final lingering question about her life, doesn't it, for Anne of Austria? Was survival the same thing as living?